Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this virtual panel discussion on feminist perspectives in international relations, security, and diplomacy. I'm Dr. Dhanasree Jayaram, Senior Assistant Professor at the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, Manipal Institute of Social Sciences, Humanities and Arts, Manipal Academy of Higher Education, and I will be moderating today's session. This event is jointly organized by the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, MISHA, in collaboration with the Kubernein initiative. Before introducing the theme of the session and also our speakers, let me briefly introduce to you the department and MISHA. The department offers master's and PhD programs in geopolitics and international relations, the first and only one of its kind in India. The main focus and objective of the programs is to expose, engage, and shape the young minds of India to the ever-changing global security discourse from an Indian perspective. The newly established MISHA brings together 6 distinguished humanities and social sciences departments in MAHE, including DGIR, to address the demands of a rapidly transforming global society. MISHA's programs that include a flagship BA Honors program with majors and minors, several master's programs in key domains, including one in geopolitics and international relations, and a PhD program. These are designed to inculcate nuanced perspective, in-depth knowledge, and crucial transferable skills. The diverse pedagogical approach at MISHA cultivates career agile graduates equipped to succeed in a versatile professional landscape. Now, coming to today's webinar, as you may see in the title of the webinar itself, the discussion will critically examine how gendered power dynamics shape global peace and security. As you may all know, at the 4th Ministerial Conference on Feminist Foreign Policies, which was held recently in Paris on the 22nd and 23rd of October, 31 countries, including Mexico, who hosted the conference in 2024, adopted a joint political declaration reaffirming their commitment to international gender equality frameworks and defending women's and girls' rights against rising global threats. This declaration emphasizes the need for a united, intersectional, and feminist approach to foreign policy. Now, through this session that we are organizing today, we aim to highlight how feminist frameworks can reimagine foreign policy and multilateral cooperation, and how they can be meaningfully integrated into mainstream international relations scholarship and practice. We are honored to have with us a distinguished set of speakers, scholars, practitioners, and policy experts who will share their insights on how feminist frameworks offer inclusive alternatives for diplomacy, foreign policy, and multilateralism. We are particularly privileged to welcome His Excellency Mr. Adolfo García Estrada, Consul General of Mexico in Mumbai, and of course, Dr. Shweta Singh from South Asian University. Before we begin, I would like to also now invite Priyanka Bhide to briefly introduce Kubernein initiative and welcome our keynote speaker. Priyanka Bhide is the co-founder and director of Kubernein initiative. She is a strategy and communication specialist with over a decade of experience working with private and non-profit sectors in South Asia, North America, and Europe, and has expertise on a wide range of issues, which include sustainable development, future forecasting, water diplomacy, governance, security, conflict resolution, and renewable energy. Please watch out for further description because these bios are quite long. You may see an extensive range of work done by Priyanka also in the chat. Over to you, Priyanka.
Thank you, Dhanasree, and it's an absolute pleasure to co-host this with MISHA at MAHE. We have a long relationship with Dhanasree as well, so it is really wonderful to do this together. You already have my very long bio, so I'll give you a little information on Kubernein initiative and what we've been doing, especially in the space of feminist foreign policy. So since 2018, we have been engaging on the feminist foreign policy discussion globally to understand what various countries are doing, and then to start a conversation from within India and see where our ideas on feminist foreign policy might lie. And to that end, over the years, we have come out with several briefs and reports and literature defining what we call an inclusive foreign policy, right? So we bring in aspects of intersectionality and inclusivity into this idea of feminist foreign policy. For the Indian context, we find that the word feminist is quite controversial. So we actually, in all of our literature, we use the word inclusive foreign policy, which suits the Indian context and the way that the trajectory may be developing. We have also then looked at how this concept integrates with various aspects of our foreign policy. We've looked at aspects of trade, development cooperation, climate, non-traditional security, health, multilateralism, and such. And then taken it further to see how this concept of inclusivity could be applied within the Indo-Pacific region, specifically to Indo-German engagement within that region. And then, of course, we brought a lot of our ideas on intersectionality and inclusivity within foreign policy that should be an important part of feminist foreign policy descriptions to the global space as well. And we have spoken at various forums, including the various feminist foreign policy conferences in Germany, Netherlands, as well as other multilateral forums. And I had the distinct pleasure of speaking at the third ministerial conference on feminist foreign policy that was hosted by the government of Mexico. And I spoke on a panel on integrating feminist foreign policy and gender perspectives into sustainable development and financing for an equitable future. And at that conference as well, there was a very important declaration that was signed, political declaration that was signed by 20 countries to strengthen gender equality within foreign policies of the countries. It is my distinct pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, Consul General Adolfo García Estrada from the Consulate of Mexico in Mumbai. He started his career in the United Nations and served in Finland, Ireland, USA, and has worked in advancing the bilateral relations of Mexico with Thailand and Malaysia, ASEAN, and other nations in the Pacific. We will hear now directly from Consul General Estrada the wonderful work that Mexico is doing, and this is really a country for us to look towards. It was the first country from the global south that declared a feminist foreign policy in 2020. And before that, a lot of internal work has gone in, which I'm sure we will hear directly from him as well. And a very interesting aspect of their take on this journey has been to take a very cross-sectoral approach and more recently integrate a lot of care work perspectives into the thematic areas of the feminist foreign policy. But I would like to invite Consul General Estrada to please take over and give us some direct information.
Okay, can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Priyanka and Dhanasree for the introduction. It is my absolute pleasure to be here at the Manipal Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities and Arts to talk about this very important topic for us, and I would say for the rest of the world. Before I begin, I just have a question. Our audience would be composed by students of international relations. So what is the audience that is attending right now?
So mostly international relations. Some are maybe from sociology or literature background as well. So it's mostly from social sciences, humanities, and arts, with the majority from geopolitics and international relations.
Bachelor's degree in international
and master's degree? Master's degree, yes.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, I'm asking this because I think it is very pertinent and important for students that are going to be, the future diplomats, professors, decision makers, to have this topic in the radar, the feminist foreign policy or inclusion policies in general, that I would think are absolutely crucial, central for us. So, well, first of all, let me tell you, as Priyanka said, Mexico has had this journey. We didn't start from zero, but I think that our journey towards inclusion accelerated in the past, few years. And the feminist foreign policy is a reflection of that. Let me tell you that we right now, coming from a political situation in which a political composition in which most of the main posts were taken up by men with a relatively or scant participation of women. Now the situation in Mexico is completely different. So right now, Mexico has one of the most, one of the largest representation of women in parliament. It is actually a parity parliament. 50% of the deputies of the Congress people are women. Our cabinet is also approaching parity. 40% of the state governors are women. And of course, we are very proud that we have, since last year, our first female president, Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum, the first woman president to be elected president of Mexico. So this, sets the scene for what has been occurring in Mexico. And you are absolutely right. We established our feminist foreign policy in 2020. We were the first, among the first in the world, and as you pointed out, Priyanka, the first country in the global south to establish a feminist foreign policy as a reflection and as a sign of the importance that Mexico bestows on these issues. Let me start by saying about this that it is very important to understand. I mean, you talked about the distinction between feminism and inclusion. A feminist foreign policy is not a policy for women alone. Right? It's not a policy where only women are concerned. Right? It's a recognition of the importance of women and the importance of inclusion and the importance of gender, of a gender perspective, for the whole of society, including, of course, men. So I think that is very important to understand and to reflect upon, especially for female and male students. A feminist foreign policy or an inclusive foreign policy or inclusive public policies in general benefit all the society as a whole, right? So for us, the feminist foreign policy was a recognition of that and a commitment not to be, to leave these issues in the rhetoric, in the discourse, but actually to implement, right? To implement this vision, not only within Mexico, as I mentioned, we have come a long way towards inclusion, but also outside, also for our, all our foreign engagements. So what is the Mexican foreign policy in practical terms? Well, we talk from, within our ministry, we have, we conceptualize the foreign policy, Mexican foreign policy, a foreign policy with 5 main pillars. And I will describe them to you very shortly. So the first pillar of the Mexican foreign policy, Mexican feminist foreign policy, would be a foreign policy with a gender perspective. So a feminist agenda. So what does that mean? That means that the feminist and foreign policy, the inclusion aspect of a foreign policy, will be mainstreamed. The gender perspective will be mainstream across all facets of Mexico's foreign policy. Of course, there's an emphasis on multilateral affairs where these issues are a particular emphasis in multilateralism, where these issues normally are debated, but not only that. So the feminist foreign policy is mainstream across all the domains, in political, bilateral affairs, in, of course, multilateral affairs, in consular affairs that for us are very, very important. The gender perspective has a crucial role. Second pillar would be an internal pillar for the foreign ministry that would be a gender balanced foreign ministry. What does that mean? Is that the feminist foreign policy seeks to correct the gender disparities that have traditionally existed in the public institutions and including the foreign ministry. So there have been there has been a concerted effort to promote women to leadership roles, to establish affirmative action policies to enhance the participation of women within the ministry, etc. So we understand that to have a feminist foreign policy, of course, we need to have the right, to transit the path towards equality within the ministry. Third pillar would be a foreign ministry free of violence. I think that this is very important. So there is a concerted and a very important effort within the ministry to eradicate gender-based violence, sexual harassment, etc., within the foreign ministry. So there are a lot of actions that have been implemented to address this issue. So that is a very, very important part. And it's also an issue that is reflected in our discussions with other partners. The fourth pillar is called equality is visible. And what that means is that we want to showcase and to enhance the visibility of women in main roles within the ministry. It's not only to have equality across the board, but also enhance and celebrate and promote women within our foreign policy. And the fifth one we call intersectional feminist approach. And that means that we do not understand the feminist foreign policy as one item in a particular domain, like for instance in the discussions of gender equality discussions within the United Nations, UN Women, the recent Beijing conference, etc. But that it is an issue that permeates across the board, that this is intersectional. And this is also very important for the students to know that inclusion and gender equality are topics of crucial importance, not only in multilateralism, but in security issues. The gender aspect of war, of security is very important. Again, for us, the gender dimension of migration, for instance, it is very important. And if you do not understand that, then your public policies will not deal with the with a very important problem. If you don't recognize, for instance, the distinct participation of women in migration patterns, to give you an example. So, and of course, in the economic dimension and in bilateral relations with other countries, etc. So it permeates everything. And I think that is something that really has to, that your students have to reflect upon. In our consulate, for instance, in our consulate in Mumbai, we have, as in all the diplomatic and consular missions in Mexico, we have an official, my colleague, Ana Cecilia, who is here, specifically dedicated to follow the gender perspective agenda to liaise with allies, with partners. Of course, Kubernein initiative. We have had a splendid relation with them, and in general, to implement this gender perspective. For instance, the Foreign Ministry Free of Violence pillar within our offices, right? And to have all a series of activities and actions to prevent gender-based violence and to partner up with Indian friends. And that's in broad terms what we are doing. Of course, finally, one of the things that I would say, and with this I would finish my presentation, is that of course, as a country with a feminist foreign policy, we are super active in all the UN fora and all the conferences related to inclusion, equality, and gender issues. Most recently, we had a very high level delegation to the recently concluded Beijing conference, the Global Leaders Meeting on Women, and our delegation was headed by Minister Citlali Hernandez, which is, by the way, the first minister for women in the history of the Mexican cabinets. Of course, also very important decision by President Sheinbaum, and we are very proud to have a dedicated minister for women issues that went to Beijing. And what she said, what the Mexican delegation said, was that equality is not a secondary goal. It is a central pillar of peace, security, and sustainable development. And the message for the Mexican delegation was simple but powerful. Diplomacy must serve the purposes of equality, and equality must guide the way we practice diplomacy. I would leave it at this point to have space for questions and answers, and I would love to hear from you and from the students. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Estrada, for that engaging remarks, which I think has laid the foundation for more discussion on what it means to have a feminist foreign policy. And it was indeed thought-provoking to understand how Mexico's feminist foreign policy evolved over time. And hopefully there will be questions that are for the Consul General. Are there any questions? If there are questions, please raise your hand, or you could also post them in the chat. Yeah, I don't see any raised hands, but just wanted to, raise one question maybe from my side as a moderator, if I can take the liberty of doing that. And I think one of the, something that you mentioned also in your keynote address was that, Mexico was the first country in the global South to implement an official or formal foreign policy, which is feminist, or a feminist approach to foreign policy. But we also know that these thought processes have existed across many countries in the global South, including India and many others. So just wondering, like in terms of bringing together these diverse voices on board, what role can Mexico play in sort of leading these voices, and also and taking this sort of conversation forward, particularly in the global South? Yes.
Yes. Well, I mean, I would say that by itself, that the very fact that Mexico is one of the champions of the feminist foreign policy speaks volumes of about what can be done in what is now what is termed the global south. So traditionally, I mean, I have I have had engagements with many people in India and in other places, and traditionally they think, when they think about these topics, the first thing that pops to their minds is, oh, okay, so this is the agenda of certain countries, of the maybe Nordic countries, maybe, countries more identified traditionally with equality. And the fact is that our countries and Mexico is a true leader, and we are demonstrating with facts, right? What can be done with our limited resources, but if you have a political disposition you give the political importance to this issue, you can really go a long way, right? So maybe to answer your question, some countries would say, "Oh, this is an agenda for certain countries, for that have had this agenda in the for many years, but not for us." And I would say this is an agenda for everyone. This is an agenda for of crucial importance for North and South, East and West, right? So I mean. Where I mean, gender and inclusion, how you call that, how you term this issue. Inclusion policies should be, in my opinion, important and relevant worldwide, right? So it's not a matter of certain countries, but it's a matter of all of us, right? And if you think that many of the international problems or the international challenges that we face are transnational by nature. So how can you approach problems like security, migration, climate change, with an inclusion perspective in one place and not an inclusion perspective in other places? I mean, it doesn't work because we are on the same boat, right? So I think that we should think that these are challenges that affect us, regardless of where we are.
Thank you. Priyanka, you had raised your hand earlier, so yeah, over to you.
Yes. I had a quick question because what was really fascinating for me when I was at the conference last year, and in general, I've been tracking what Mexico has been doing, is the kind of engagement regionally that you have also kind of championed and spearheaded. So, if you could speak a little bit to some of that work, how you have also collaborated with your region and neighboring countries, on some of these important issues, I think that would be very useful learning for us as well.
Well, certainly I'm not an expert on the field, but let me just say that we have taken the initiative, and we have organized and hosted both the international feminist foreign policy conference that you mentioned. We have also hosted a series of regional conferences in Latin America as a preparation for global conferences. And Latin American countries, in general, we are very much very close to each other in terms of, in socially speaking. We speak the same language, Spanish and Portuguese. We have we face so many challenges. And then again, I would build on my previous answer. If Mexico can show that things can be done, and that we want to address some aspects of our society, of our economy, that are very much touched and very much determined by this issue. Then for other countries that are also close to us, that should serve as an example, I would say, right? A very good example, because we are very close. I think there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat. I think that's related to what Priyanka also asked about, regional approaches. And I think before I come to Mexico's, political will to advance its FFP, I think we'll take up this question. How do regional institutions and organizations help in feminist principles and international security, especially in terms of the WPS agenda? So maybe, from your experience of maybe looking at the Latin American region and the regional organizations, is it possible for regional organizations to really advance this agenda on FFP, feminist security, WPS agenda, etc.?
So the question is if regional
yes,
if regional organizations can advance the, well, I would say yes. I mean all multilateral forums. I mean, and that goes for that is a very pertinent, very international relations student type of question. What is the importance of regional organizations? And I think that regional organizations can play an absolute crucial role, right? Because again, we're talking about countries that share a certain degree of similarities, maybe values, maybe language, as I mentioned, and that they gather in a forum that is more manageable. They are more manageable forums than like the United Nations, for instance, right? So the United Nations has a whole different dynamic. It's a huge organization, and of course, all the countries, big and small, the big superpowers, everybody is there. So maybe a regional organization can take this to a more the discussion to a more manageable level. I mean, I don't have a concrete answer for that. I would say that, I mean, everything is good. I mean, as long as you are advancing the cause or advancing this the discussion, it is always positive.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's one more question, if that's okay. We can take up one more question. That is Teresa Shaju's question. How does Mexico maintain the political will to advance its feminist foreign policy across different administrations? So I think this is one of the challenges, like, if there is a change in administration, suddenly an official foreign feminist foreign policy might cease to exist. So how do you ensure that it continues?
Wow, that's a very good question. I would say that this is now a state policy. I mean, the Mexican foreign policy, the feminist foreign policy, was established under the administration of President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, and this, has advanced under the president during the administration of Claudia Sheinbaum. They are representing the same party, but I would hope that this policy remains in the future. So how can you maintain the political will? Well, hopefully mentalities will be transformed, and I mean, for us, for our government, the social aspect of public policy is absolutely essential. It is crucial, right? So the inclusion, fight against poverty, and non-discrimination. They are core values that have been promoted to the center of political discourse in Mexico. So I would say that those are very important values, and well, I hope that they are self-evidently good objectives, right? Inclusion, and how can you be against that, in my opinion?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that sort of also takes us to this question of how do these values remain relevant, and how do you institutionalize them, and all these questions which become relevant, particularly in a very systemic way, which ensures continuity and sustainability of these values. I see Professor K.P. Vijayalakshmi, the head of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, is here, and she has raised her hand, so maybe she would like to ask you a question.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. We cannot hear you.
Well, I mean, while we wait for that question, I just wanted to complement my answer. How
Yes.
you cement these public policies. I have to say that in Mexico, it is it is by law, that that the law requires you to have equality, for instance, in the representation in our Congress, right? So there are also legal, a formal legal aspect that sets standards for equal representation and equality, and the promotion, legal promotion of inclusion and equality, and the fight against discrimination across the board. So there's also this legal side to all of this.
Yeah. The legal side, of course, that's another important pillar. I'm not sure. I still cannot see or hear Professor Vijayalakshmi, unfortunately. I don't know, Anand, if you are there, if you can help her, because yeah, she's just sitting upstairs in the same building, just that I cannot go and find out. But if someone else, Anand, if you can just help her, because I know that the Consul General also has to leave right now. But thank you so much for joining us in this webinar, and giving us those insights on Mexican, foreign policy. Deeply appreciate all the insights that you have given, which really enriches our understanding and inspires, the students that we have, joined this webinar. And most of them, as I said, are international relations students. So this is, of course, something, food for thought, which would also let them think of alternative pathways, and not just stick to the traditional paradigms that we are all usually entrenched within international relations. Okay, I see now she's here. Yeah, Professor Vijayalakshmi, yeah, over to you. Can't hear you. Yeah, sorry.
No.
I think she wants to thank you, from what I understand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we just can't hear it. I don't know. Usually it works for her. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Apologize for this technical glitch.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, she will be joining the panel later. By that time, hopefully, we will fix the audio problem. But thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Estrada, and hope to have you again, and maybe host you in Manipal physically at some point, and hear from you more about insights on feminist foreign policy and beyond, of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your attention. And if you have any lingering doubt, and if something sparked your interest, please don't hesitate to contact us. We are in Consul General of Mexico in Mumbai. You can drop us a line.
Dr.
And we'll be
Dana,
happy
can
to
you hear
respond.
me just for testing?
Yes. Yes. Now, yes. Yes.
Oh, okay. So let me
Yeah.
just thank Your Excellency, Senor García. We are very indebted to your practical view of how to take such an important task forward. I had only one question, maybe sometime else we can get to it. But really, it's about how do you overcome resistance from other members in meetings? Because at the moment that we are seeing the unfolding of so many conflicts, we've seen a regression from what was 25 years ago in 1325 and the great hopes we had. So how, many countries and many representatives, I'm sure with your experience, they are very resistant to some of these ideas. So how do you overcome resistance, in taking such an agenda forward about mainstreaming gender into international relations and global politics? Thank you, Dana. It was a bit long, but what could I do?
No problem. Thank you. Yeah, over to you.
I mean, I would say that that's precisely one of the main, areas for our Mexican feminist foreign policy is engagement. So trying to engage all the time with our partners and trying to talk and discuss about our, objectives and hopefully, they will, our point will get across. I would think that maybe not everything is lost. And there's, maybe there are people that are reacting to this, but there's also movement. There's also, other, countries have the good results also. So I think that it is a matter of, keeping the work, keeping the engagement. And again, I would finish by reiterating what I said at the beginning, especially dedicated to our to the students, to male students, inclusion policies and feminist foreign and otherwise policies are not policies against men, right? They are policies that promote inclusion, and inclusion benefits everybody, all the society, right? So we have to be very clear about that, and hopefully that is the message that resonates with all with your students, right?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I
Thank
think,
you very much.
yes, and as I already said, hoping to host you again, virtually or physically, whichever
Yes.
way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Okay. So I think, yeah, we will quickly move on to our next segment of this online panel discussion, because we are running a little behind time. It's fine. We're still okay. And that is, as I already mentioned, we have with us Dr. Shweta Singh, Associate Professor of International Relations at South Asian University, New Delhi. Her research actually broadly focuses on feminist international relations in South Asia, which is what she will speak about today, touching upon critical peace and conflict studies with a particular focus on post-colonial South Asia, the politics of everyday norms and WPS agenda in South Asia, gender and populism, and contemporary politics of Afghanistan, Kashmir, and Sri Lanka. So thank you so much, Shweta, for joining us today, and over to you. You're muted, sorry.
Okay.
First and foremost, thank you so much, Dhanasree, Manipal University and Kubernein for organizing this panel and for bringing us all together. Such a privilege and actually an honor to be sharing this space, this dialogical space with Consul General Estrada, Professor Vijayalakshmi, my teacher, professor, co-traveler. So wonderful to see you again. And Miss Priyanka, Bhide, and of course you, Dhanasree. So in fact, I was thinking, and when I was thinking about our conversation and the idea of mapping feminist international relations in South Asia, I thought, where do I start the story? Or rather the stories, because it's a question of, it's an act of storytelling. And I must admit, it was a dilemma for me as I continue to think about this idea of feminist IR in South Asia. Because I think feminist international relations in South Asia is a fluid space. It's a contingent space, and it is a space that is marked both by dialogue and dissidence. But most importantly, it's a generative space. And I think I would talk about this generative space, this idea of generative space, both in my journey in terms of co-editing the volume on feminist international relations in South Asia, past and present, and also beyond that, a continuing journey in terms of engagement with the idea of feminist IR in South Asia. And I think as I do this, I'll hop on and off the book, but I also center my reflections on feminist IR in South Asia, thinking through and cutting across geo-epistemic spaces. So I think this conversation with Consul General Estrada was particularly interesting because I think we also need to have these cross-cutting dialogues in the context of the regional spaces that we are talking about. And I think that's extremely important. So I think, as I said, before I actually start to talk about some of these ideas, I thought, let me bring to you a few narratives. And I think these narratives speak a lot in the context of the complexity of the field itself. So I quote, "One day you look and find I'm gone." This is Rahila Muska, as quoted in Elsa Griswold. The narrative is a folk couplet called Lande, an oral and often anonymous song that is sung by Pashto women in Afghanistan. Now, Pashto women have used this oral tradition to articulate about truth, war, and violence, separation, homeland, and grief. The teenage poet who sung this called herself Rahila Muska. Eliza Griswold, who worked on the Landes project, writes that Rahila Muska lived in Helmand, a Taliban stronghold. Muska, like many young women in rural Afghanistan, was not allowed to leave home, and poetry was her only form of connection and community, and perhaps, I emphasize, her only form of resistance. In 2010, Muska set herself on fire as her brothers had discovered that she wrote poetry and was beaten up badly before she set herself on fire. I bring to you the voice of Muska, the voice of resistance and solidarity, to highlight the most unconventional ways in which we stitch together ideas and perhaps add voice to feminist IR. My attempt here may not sound coherent, but that is the very purpose, as difference, and I emphasize, is what makes feminist IR come alive. The second narrative, and I quote again, "Our land is drying up and our water is polluted," says Nati Machacha, one of the protesters manning a roadblock in the village of Purma Marca, high in the Andes Mountains. Ms. Machacha is a spokesperson for the indigenous groups living in Jujuy, a province in northern Argentina. So we are going from Afghanistan to Argentina. Jujuy is located in what has become known as the Lithium Triangle, a stretch of the Andes straddling the tri-border area between Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, which holds the world's highest reserves of lithium. It has become specially sought after as electrical cars, which also use lithium in batteries, are becoming increasingly popular. Argentina is the world's #4 lithium producer, but some residents of Jujuy say not only are they benefiting from the industry, but that they're not only benefiting from, but that their way of life is under threat as a result of it. Lithium extraction requires huge amounts of water, about 2 million liters per ton. And locals like Nati Machacha, who live off the land and raise cattle in the predominantly rural area, fear it is drying the soil and polluting the water. If this goes on, we will starve and become ill, she warns. So listening, feeling, sensing this narrative, while we think about Afghanistan and Argentina, I will further nudge you to think about dislocation and rupture, and I emphasize dislocation and rupture through a brown refugee body. Think about the racialized, sexualized allegory deployed for the brown man in a white world. A key word that I would draw your attention to is what the white world deploys as refugee crisis. What does the word crisis signify? Is there a gendered connotation to the idea of crisis? Is the category refugee crisis a floating signifier representing the anxieties and the fears of the white world? In this floating signifier, is there a discursively construed gendered other, the enemy other? And what echoes for me is what Silima Poundy notes and says: crisis can be perceived as a perceptual frame-breaking moment that dismantles the certainties and normative narratives of a nation. But why do we need to pay attention to this narrative? Why do I foreground this narrative? Maybe, and that is something that I nudge you to think about, we need to foreground the intersectional constellation of religion, region, race, gender, caste, and ethnicity when we are thinking about this category of refugee, the gendered other. So in these narratives, and just drawing from these narratives and thinking about this, how do you then think about this moment in global politics? One of the challenges for us in the discipline of international relations is how do we actually characterize, how do we actually start to think about this moment in global politics? And here, I think what really resonates for me and what I take a clue from is Antonio Gramsci. I would say Antonio Gramsci in this moment in time would more appropriately classify this as what he says, an age of monsters. Now, what does the age of monsters do? Also, so many of you are young IR students. What does the age of monsters do? The age of monsters brings and foregrounds a period in time, what Gramsci called as interregnum. Now, this is a very interesting period, and if you're thinking about the interregnum, a moment in time in history when older socio-political structures are collapsing, dying, but no new stable order has yet emerged. This transitional moment in time and space brings in disruptions, or what we can classify as ruptures. And this is marked by onslaught of authoritarianism, populism, extremism, and crisis of the liberal world order. For us, in this current moment in time, it is marked by a reversal to politics of reification and boundaries. So, standing in this space, in this context, where we're thinking about these differing narratives from differing geopolitical spaces, in this moment, what can be classified as an interregnum? What does feminist politics offer to us? What can the analytical lens of feminist IR do to us? And can we subscribe, and that's the most important question I feel, can we ascribe to one singular lens of feminism? And if it is feminism in the plural, how do we then build networks of solidarity and resistance? Further, how do we think about politics of space and location? To my mind, space and location is extremely important as we think through building alternative networks and epistemic frameworks. In this, how do we navigate disciplinary diktats? And that's something which is extremely important. How do we visibilize liminal spaces and the politics of both margins and marginality? Further, while we think about this moment in global politics, this is and cannot be bereft of histories. And when I say histories, I definitely say this in all its plural forms. And I think what we really need to foreground then is pay attention to both the politics of colonialism and coloniality. So conversations across, post-colonial identities. How does this complicate then our understanding further? I would say that when we are thinking about feminist international relations, one of the biggest complications or one of the biggest challenges is the messiness of the field itself. But this messiness is what we need to recognize. There are no neatly cut disciplinary boundaries. They cut across silos. But from this messiness is what we need to tease out the transformative potential of the idea of feminist IR itself, specifically in South Asia. And I think these were some of the contestations when we were thinking about even the edited volume, the Feminist International Relations in South Asia, past and present. And one of our biggest dilemmas was then how do we move forward from this messiness? Because as we sat down, I think it was very difficult to identify a singular body of literature that could fit into the strict template of feminist IR. So one of the things that we recognized, and as we are having this conversation, is cut across disciplinary boundaries. We've had conversations in the field of anthropology, in the field of sociology, in the field of history. So there is this interdisciplinarity that we need to foreground and move beyond these disciplinary dictates. So it actually takes us back to the question, then what is feminist IR? What constitutes feminist IR? And how do we think about feminist IR differently in South Asia? And I think both these questions, while sound straightforward, actually are not. And I can say this, that as we are thinking about this, I do want to foreground the 3 S's. And I think the 3 S's are extremely important if we are thinking about differing research clusters within the field of feminist IR itself. Sites, spaces, and silences. Now, this is intricately connected to the politics of knowledge production itself. I started with the idea of feminist IR as a generative space. And if you're thinking about feminist IR as a generative space, I think sites, spaces, and silences are extremely important for us to think about in the context of the implicit power hierarchies in the field itself. So when I say sites, I would actually nudge you to pay attention to sites which are not legitimately recognized as IR. So for instance, in the field of IR, if you're looking at the genealogy of the discipline of international relations, do we then think about writings of Ruqaiya Sakhawat Hussain and ideas of feminist utopia? I'm not sure how many of you have thought about it. Do you then go back to Therigata as a feminist IR text? We often think about Kautilya's Arthashastra, but what about the Therigata written in the 6th century BC, which was in fact for the first time talking about ideas of intersectionality? So if you're looking at this feminist genealogy, historicizing this feminist genealogy, I think you need to dig deeper. So coming back to Ruqaiya Sakhawat Hussain, who was writing in colonial India, a Muslim woman writing in English, but calling attention to the world that turns patriarchy upside down. In similar vein, as I started, I draw your attention going back to the Landes in Afghanistan, to poetry as an alternative site of resistance and solidarity, or the Therigata that I just mentioned, which was written in the 6th century BC. Fast forward, let me come to some of the contemporary ideas and contested ideas. And I think the Consular General was talking about the idea of feminist foreign policy, or the use of the word inclusive foreign policy, or gender-sensitive foreign policy. There's so much to do in the context of the politics of language when we are thinking about it. But the larger question that I draw your attention to is, can we talk about feminist foreign policies bereft of histories? And what is then the site of co-production of the idea of feminist foreign policy itself? Is its epistemic location the global north? Is its epistemic location the global south? How do we transcend implicit global hierarchies through the politics of language and domination, which is pay attention to ideas of coloniality that are embedded within these frameworks? So I think in all of this, what am I nudging you to? And what am I actually pushing you to do through this messiness? I think I'm pushing you to think about paying attention to conceptual innovation. Most of the times when we are looking at differing areas, be it in the field of geopolitics or feminist IR, we tend to juxtapose ideas from the global north, conceptually and theoretically, and superimposing them on research clusters, for instance, in South Asia. And I think that, to my mind, is problematic, because South Asia itself cannot be captured or produced or juxtaposed through templates or conceptual frames that I would say are squarely imported from global north. And therefore, for me, particularly, the epistemic location South Asia is important. I'm coming back to the idea of space, the politics of epistemic silences within the space. The point of emphasis, surely, then, as a continuing thread, is the location South Asia, which is particularly valid as it does not refer to more authentic point of epistemic access, but in fact underlines the importance of certain density of arguments within a lived community and in the process of knowledge production. What has stayed with me through my journey in a continuing engagement with feminist IR as a field has been Kumari Jayawardene, who was writing, and I think who was pushing us for epistemic disobedience, if I can use that right now, and whom I highly recommend all of you read. Writing in 1986, when the field of feminist IR relation or feminist international relations was really at its nascent stages, and I quote, and she wrote, "Feminism was not imposed on the third world by the West, but rather the historical circumstances produced important material and ideological changes that affected women, even though the impact of imperialism and Western thought was admittedly among the most significant elements in these historical circumstances." So what is a clear-cut nudge? The clear-cut nudge is that gender and international relations or questions around feminist IR is actually not about simple, straightforward templates, but a more complex terrain mediated by different kinds of isms. And I wanted to say colonialism, nationalism, imperialism. And our analysis cannot be bereft of these histories. So the point, as I said at the start, was, and as I've been writing on this, I could clearly see that the field has been in dialogue, but this was clear-cut dissident voices through generations of feminist writings, first generation, second generation, third generation, and now fourth generation of feminist IR scholars. And for me, at least, the framing of the field has been around what I classify as the 3Ds: dialogue, difference, and dissidence. And the last two Ds, difference and dissidence, are particularly important. And I think that pays attention to politics of erasures and silences, the politics of both marginalization.
Okay, did we just lose her? Yeah.
Power relations. And I think that's something that we've seen in different areas. And I'm sure, Priyanka, in your work on inclusive foreign policy, you would see, for instance, how we're also looking at the whole context of dichotomies, for instance, in the framing of feminist foreign policy itself. And then what are the departure points if you're thinking about the points on coloniality and colonialism in that context? Going back to this, so I think what we need to recenter our gaze on is the idea of difference. So when we are thinking about this epistemic value, the idea of difference for me is extremely important. And then I think there are two important strands that I can really pick and say what constitutes feminist IR. I think the idea of both plurality and polyphony. Now, if you're looking at plurality, and I think we've had such raging conversations, for instance, I go back to some of our conversations which we were having as far, with the first, the second, and the third generation of feminist IR scholars in the process of editing the book. And I remember raging conversations, for instance, on religion and IR. And when we would have conversations on religion and IR, someone like Sabagul Khatak, who we would say is both the first and generation scholar, she would say we should not be talking about feminist IR and religion. But there were the second and the third generation scholars who would say, no, we still need to engage with the idea of religion. So the differing histories of feminist movements, for instance, in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, and then how do you engage with the idea of global sisterhood, universalisms, or the idea of difference that we are talking about. So just to stitch all of this together, I would say thinking about feminist IR in South Asia calls for acts of epistemic disobedience, both within the broader contours of the discipline of IR, but also within the subfield of the feminist IR itself. In fact, acts of epistemic disobedience are innate to geo-epistemic matrix of global South. They're deeply rooted in decolonial politics, with a recognition that coloniality, colonial hierarchies are intertwined with the politics of knowledge production. For instance, Afghanistan, or the land days, or the oral poetry that I'm talking about. Afghanistan then becomes a discursive site. Nivi Manchanda says, which represents an intrinsically violent place in this imperial imaginary. The other, the violent other, the gendered other. So I would say, in a story systematically crafted by colonizers and colonial historiography, foreground the 3Ds, dialogue, difference, and dissidence, as we are thinking through ideas of both resistance and solidarity. The challenge then for us as researchers, as academics, as students, as practitioners is, how do we actually go from here to there? And Walker says, then the story that we are paying attention to is the story of absences in the presences. And I quote Walker here. It is actually the story of absences. It's the story of silences that we are talking about. And so as you curate this story, pay attention to the politics of language. I would urge you to go back to differing historical sites and language. I think if I'm talking about, there's such a rich and textured history in Malayalam, in Bengali, in Pali, in Tamil. And I think, do we then bring back those histories to think about feminist IR in South Asia? Or do we relegate that in preference of an English-oriented, translated version of certain of the ideas that we are talking about? So I think my push is for pluriversality. My push is to think about decolonial ways of thinking, diverse ways of knowing. And I think in the process, walk on the path of epistemic disobedience, recognizing hegemonic forces and the dictates of language, but still finding voice in agency, and agency both in the messiness and polyphonic orientation of the field itself. So I leave it at that thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shweta. I think, giving us this kind of very historical, genealogical journey of feminist international relations, and not from one perspective, but as you said, from a very pluralistic perspective, which is something that is very important. And I think this is something, especially touching upon space and all of that. It's also something that is relevant to critical geopolitics, for instance. It's not just critical international relations or feminist international relations. So thank you so much. Just looking at the time, we are as we are running behind time. We will move on to the Q&A and then maybe also take a few questions for Shweta later on. We have two more speakers. Priyanka, I already introduced to you. We have also with us Professor KP Vijayalakshmi, who is the professor and head of the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations, MISHA MAHE. She has been professor of US Studies and former chairperson of the Center for Canadian, US and Latin American Studies, School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi, and currently she also serves as the Executive Council member of Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis. Let me just, open up the questions. Maybe, one of the questions, Priyanka, I just wanted to start with you, and then I will, let Professor Vijayalakshmi, give us also an academic sort of point of view on some of these issues that Shweta also raised. I don't know, Priyanka, listening to also the Consul General, what are your views on what are the key challenges right now to implementing like feminist foreign policy in a very complex sort of geopolitical landscape that we have right now? And how can, different actors, institutions like yours who have been, very active in the space for a long time, how do you really navigate these constraints over time? Yeah, Priyanka.
Thank you, Dhanasree, and thank you, Shweta. That was very fantastic. And before I answer your question, Dhanasree, I must already kind of lay the ground that this will be a very different answer from the academic space, which from Shweta I get the sense of it. It's a very different kind of explorative space when it comes to looking at these concepts in academia versus as practitioners. You have to sort of approach it in a way where you can actually have policymakers take up some of the issues that you're working on. So we will sound very different, but we belong very much to the same family. And in fact, when we did our research, we spoke to not only the policymakers, we also spoke to academics such as yourself who are working on gender issues, who have been working on feminist IR within the Indian space, for several years before this concept of feminist foreign policy was even discussed globally. So I just wanted to put that out there. But yes, you're right. So since the time that we started, the global space on feminist foreign policy is shrinking. But it has been very, I mean, the shrinking space is not because the concept does not have validity. It's more to do with the trajectories of countries, right? So it's very specific to internal politics within countries. So I think that is very important to recognize. And the whole concept of feminist foreign policy is that every country looks at where they are at in terms of gender mainstreaming, inclusivity, what they need to do, and then kind of integrating ideas into the way they can move forward, right? So every country has a very different feminist foreign policy trajectory. Um, and that's something I think Shweta also alluded, right? There cannot be a global framework that has to be adopted by all. And in fact, even if you follow, we are part of the Feminist Foreign Policy Collaborative, which is a group of organizations across the world working on this concept, right? Nowhere does anybody say that this is something that is set in stone and you follow it. And in fact, when we started engaging on the idea, we realized the reason that there wasn't a perspective from India or the global south was because there was nobody there talking about it, right? So it's not that it's of course these views are appreciated, but you have to somehow go there and put it out there. And so in that case, academic research also becomes a very important component of it. So although the global space is shrinking, I'll come back to that point. It is very specific to country trajectories, right? And even in countries that, for example, Sweden was the first country to have such a feminist foreign policy, and they've now dissociated from the word feminist. But if you see the structural changes that have been brought in these countries, they still remain, right? Because they have built on work on gender that had been taking place within those countries as it is. So just on the, of course, in terms of the PR of it, perhaps they don't use the word feminist. And again, it's very specific to things that are happening internally, right? But there, I think there is scope for then countries like India to step in, right? Because if you see the Indian trajectory, we have moved for quite some years now from this women's development to women-led development. You see the government taking very strong step towards this Nari Shakti. We have the Ministry of Women and Child Development has mandated gender cells in each ministry. And so even in the foreign ministry, you have a gender cell with a nodal point there, thinking about how budgets will be different. And the budgets on gender are increasing year on year annually, and they're increasing not only towards welfare schemes, they're also increasing towards capacity building, right, for women's participation in the workforce and such. So these are changes that India is working on. So even if I mean, the reason why we dissociate from the word feminist is because it's looked at very much from the perspective of sex, men and women, and not from the gendered perspective. It's not understood very well in the policy space. And so we use inclusion. It's easier to kind of mainstream those issues because we have already been doing it. And that is the trajectory of feminist foreign policy, right? To build on what is already existing and then push that forward, because that is something that is practically feasible to do. So I'll just pause there and let you come in. But if I've not answered some part of your question, I'm happy to go back to it.
No, it's fine. Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. That was just like, just to sort of start off the conversation from where the Consul General also left, and also with Shweta's engagement from the point of view of feminist IR and what does it mean. So now I'll welcome Professor Vijayalakshmi to make her remarks, and I think after listening to all these interventions, your own reflections, because you've been in this field for decades now and have contributed a lot to the evolution of IR in India as well. in what ways have feminist approaches influenced, say, diplomatic practices or formulation of foreign policy, or how do we relook at IR from this perspective? Sorry, you're muted, ma'am.
Is it audible now?
Yes, yes.
Oh, so thanks, Dana, and I'm so happy to see you this evening. This is a plan we had hatched 3 years ago, and we've been trying. And thank you, Priyanka. Thank you, Shweta. It's such a pleasure. After Manhattan, I think we are doing this. So in many ways, I go back to several decades of being in the field and not being able to do much more than what I wanted to do, kind of thing. But it has been a great experience just listening to the three perspectives that were given today. And I have to say, Dana, this organizing of this kind of a conversation itself is a very big step forward for feminist IR and the scholarship of feminist IR. Okay, so this is the kind of institutionalization that you talked about, and you were inquiring both regional, etc. I believe in another word which is very peculiar to many of us called local. If you start locally, you can go past so many levels and reach global. So global, so I think local communities and their involvement would be the best way. So every university has a role to play, and therefore we are doing that. But let me also ask you, a series of questions which I think will help for the general idea of where the field is and how we're going forward with it. One is, when we think of international relations, whose voices do we hear? Whose experiences shape what we call as global politics? These are questions for every youngster to ponder, because it doesn't stop with one generation. It hasn't stopped with the work done earlier or not to be done or is in the process. You still have to ask these questions. At its core, what we are seeing is feminist IR is about making what Shweta has called three silos, silence. I added the word silos, but silences, signs, and space, if I heard you correctly. I'm not sure if I heard it, but I'm adding silos to it because I know women constantly live in silences of silos. And that's one of the most difficult part of, when we started WPS in, Delhi. It was hard to get women to speak about what was happening, and that silence part is one of the biggest challenge that you faced over the years, and that sadly seems to have come back, which is why I find resistance again, towards this idea. But making visible what has been invisible, and that is, I think, Shweta's point. I'm taking it from there. So, feminist IR is about talking not just about the lived in experiences and so on, but starkly pointing out the sufferings. The immediacy and the harshness of war sometimes is lost for televised audiences of today, or the social media of today. So we tend to see the bomb going off, everything is falling down. Well, there's a show next after that which is also doing something like that. So there's this general layering in your mind which has desensitized you to some of the criticality of how you need to help in those periods. So this sufferings, etc. I think it asks, therefore, the feminist IR, from what I got from Shweta and from Priyanka, was that, who gets protected in global conflicts? Who gets to speak? And who gets the nod for doing something? Those are the questions that shape our lives that we are leading in this 21st century. So, but I think feminist IR also does a very important thing, and I'm sitting amidst all three of you, and I think that's something I've observed, and today too I felt it. It starts this conversation from a place of empathy, not condescension. That's a very big distinction, because when you talk about colonial mindset, or you talk about borrowing from the West, etc., 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 it's basically condescension that we find that, we cannot understand it. We are speaking in English. We have no problem with being a global community, but we have to have empathy for each other. Then, in essence, I also think that feminist IR over the years, as the way we are seeing it unfold today also, is political and personal is political, Cynthia Enlow's work and all of that. And I think that really initiates the feminist IR engages, initiates, and uses certain terminology to ignite the conversation that can break down these silos and invisibility of marginalized groups, etc. I think that's very important. Secondly, I think it also demonstrates that the inclusion of a gender perspective is well, it reconceptualizes the knowledge of IR itself and the practice, not just the knowledge, epistemological communities, all of that, but even the practice, because feminist foreign policy is now practice. I think that's a point that you need to keep in mind. There's a very important contribution that IR has done. And, the nature of feminist inquiry, again, I take a leaf from Shweta. I think we'll have to keep saying that I take from Shweta, but it's fantastic. We've gone beyond what I found at that time. Where are the women kind of questions? Why aren't the women being there? That kind of stuff. But today, IR has moved from that, feminist IR, from add women and stir the pot kind of, approach to making gender a central category of analysis. And I think I'm very happy to see what she said about the South Asian experiences, the narratives that she was talking about, especially inclusivity. Attacking marginalization is one part of it. Building a practice of inclusivity with transparency is a greater task because nobody believes you when you start it. And, dissidence and dissent tolerance has to be there first, I think. Anyway, that's one of the things. The other thing is also important, which I think is a contribution for academics like me, and I'm still a learner in many ways. But I think this methodological pluralism that I heard about today, and I think that's really important. I mean, there's no one form or one format for me to understand everything and finish off with it. So I think, it will have application to many fields, but this methodological pluralism is what you must keep your eye on. And that really is a value addition to knowledge societies. And if you ask about global security studies, feminist scholarship is clearly bringing in something that challenges traditional security studies. And for us in geopolitics and international relations, that's also a welcome sort of perspective because it's both peacetime and war. It enables a broader understanding of security. Climate change, for example, immigration, the Consul General mentioned. Priyanka was talking about so many things that India is doing in the sidelines. We don't put it on top. So all kinds of things. So when you define your interaction with other states as a foreign policy person, I'm telling you, as well as, when you're having to deal with movements of non-state actors, etc., how do you prioritize security and peace together? That becomes the task of the feminist IR. And because of that, you may see, I think in the coming years, I just read about UN's commemoration of 1325. I was just going through some of the publications. But, it will come back to now the question of how feminist IR, both epistemologically and all this that I've talked about, will begin to advance the idea of influencing foreign policy practice. How do you influence that practice? How do you change that? I don't know how to explain it. Don't just think about migration as a people problem, number of people who are illegal, etc., etc. There's also some other things that have caused it. So there is a way of looking at it. So critiquing mainstream theories, I think that's one thing that almost all students would love to do because their minds are so bright and they'd like to see something very different from their own experience. They'll probably put it across. And of course, all of them can draw on Anne Ticknor to Cynthia Enlow to Charlotte Hooper and so many names I've put down in many structured stuff. But the utilization of gendered analysis, which is the important distinction that Priyanka also mentioned, about female, male, and not wanting to be identified as feminists. And sadly, that hasn't changed. Many people do say, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in certain things, etc. But this gendered analysis is one way of finding how scholars can focus broadly on security and defining it in a way that encompasses other elements beyond just traditional security, like human security, domestic violence, even economic security, because conflicts don't end with just getting a physical security. First is physical security, but survival, food, everything comes into it. Then India's case, and I thought I'll just end with that, but I think India's case is very particularly interesting because we all live in India and we are Indians. So in some ways, it is a very important marker in your mind. Um, its actions and initiatives have not been formalized like Mexico. However, its development partnerships and the emphasis given, as again Priyanka mentioned, about women-led development. I took part in the W20 of MAHE, just 2 years ago. We did, and we put it on the web. There's a number of things that you can see, and the capacity building more than just tokenism or giving freebies and allowing them to participate. Allowing is a wrong word, but encompassing their numbers into this, etc. But I think especially in health and education, you're seeing a lot of that. And climate change, again, I find that the warriors are generally women, and climate warriors, I mean. So, in that sense too, we are seeing some interesting work coming from many groups. And I want to also mention at this time that Women in Peace, there are some other experiences which are very critical for India too. But all female peacekeeping units that India has sent, I think that's a tremendous kind of bold step in international arena, if you like. It has also advocated gender equality in many things, and I'm still very proud of, as you said, one of you said about domestic politics, that's my field, 33% reservation, and we have fought it. We have fought it and fought it in many ways for getting that 33% reservation. But good or bad, it can have some impact, and it should make a landmark contribution to including a gendered discourse, which allows for gender budgeting, etc., etc. But India's deep commitment to women-led or women's empowerment and women-led development is a sure way of going through this. And then, if you think about finally about how does the WSP agenda fare globally, to go back to from local to global, we are having, I think, a cautionary tale. I mean, there has been some regression. UN itself agrees on that, Dana. It's very sad, but nevertheless, I think the common, that particular meeting on 25th October really recalls, for me at least, what Felicity Hill had once said, UNIFEM director. You see, we're not talking about just taking part or, studying conflict and security and all of that. But in real activist terms, women, who are actually working as, the Secretary General also mentioned that we must go beyond peace building, conflict, etc., to conflict prevention, which is one of the critical areas that we should think about, because rather than going on spending millions of dollars in trying to, rebuild, we better to, prevention is always better than cure, for at least for me, I think. But this, early warning system. And women have been in Liberia, in Congo, so many places we have had that experience. I think they've been put together in the UNIFEM websites and so on. In India too, we have some experience, which is very important for us to remember. Naga mothers. There's a Naga Mothers Council who actually talked about how those two communities really, I mean, those two groups fought like mad, and they were able to do some peacemaking. Of course, then they raised the questions about whether women should go in for peace, it's dangerous, etc., etc. All that came. But the fact is, conflict prevention is also part of feminist IR perspective today. So pluralist methodologies, managing intersectionality, inclusivity, making visible the invisible, giving voice to the marginalized, and bringing in conflict prevention and peace building. So I think there's a whole bunch of stuff out there that all of us need to think. So I think, our takeaway should be that we can rethink about the frameworks, but we have this work and the potential, and therefore the work is still to be done, and we need to push ourselves to do it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, ma'am, for actually you summarized most of the discussions already. So I don't have to do that at the end of the webinar. So that's good. And also bringing those perspectives on, what kind of regression we are seeing and how do we really navigate these challenges today. And also, like Shweta mentioned, and this cross sectoral sort of discussion on this, which is very important, because sometimes, as you said, this happens in silos, and we miss out on many perspectives that might be there. And as you mentioned, the local perspectives particularly become so important in that respect, which also sometimes get lost in the debates of international relations itself. So, I mean, we are at 5 p.m. already. I know that, but there is one question which is there in the chat for Shweta, and I thought, you could perhaps. So, I had a question myself, but instead of that, I would probably pose that question to you, Shweta, as part of the panel discussion. This is from Priya Vijayakumar, who's a faculty at MISHA. How do we keep the conversation and thinking on feminist IR going when the field of IR itself is undergoing a capture by culturally essentialist framing? And this is one of the challenges to decolonizing of knowledge production in the global south.
Thank you, Dhanasree, and thank you, Priya, for this question. In fact, this is a raging question for many of us, and we've had conversations on this. Because if you're thinking about the politics of decolonization of knowledge, we also have to understand that there is also appropriation of this framework, as very rightly you say, by culturally essentialist framing that we are talking about. And we are seeing this in the context of the rise of the populist radical right across. So, when you're talking about local, or when you're talking about decolonial politics, this is also a slippery terrain in that context. And this is a very real challenge. So I hear you on that, but I think the challenge then again is, how do we actually then, talk about the politics of language itself? Where is this rooted? How do we build networks in the context of the epistemic communities that we are talking about? But I must admit that this was one conversation that we were having in I think this was International Studies Association Conference 2024 with Sankaran Krishnan, who's talked about this whole context of post-colonial anxieties and the context of this kind of slippery terrain that we are talking about. And I think we all admit to this challenge. And I think this is a very real challenge in that context. But the conversation is on, and I think I would say for me, it is actually in the act of epistemic disobedience, in the act of both knowledge and praxis. And I wanted to really say that, it was very wonderful to be on this panel with both practitioners, academics, and policy frameworks. So, this cross-cutting conversation with diplomats, with academics, and with practitioners. So I think this is where we are actually expanding and nudging this network of epistemic community. So thank you to Manipal University and Kubernein for actually bridging this gap and for taking this conversation forward in so many ways. I'm not sure, Priya, if I have an answer to your question, but yes, I share the dilemma.
Thank you. Just wanted to say that Priyanka had to leave the meeting, Priyanka Bhide, because she had another commitment, but she just thanks everyone. She's also put a message in the chat. There's another question which, either of you, I'm, it's not really addressed to any specific panelist. This is about intersectional factors and cultural identities, and what role do they play in implementing the WPS agenda at regional or national levels, and what are some barriers and opportunities that exist in doing so? I don't know who wants to take that up.
Okay. I just wanted to
start.
I can just start and just briefly, because this was one of the papers that I had on Afghanistan in the context of implementation of the WPS agenda in differing geographical spaces. And I would say that we are actually in the 25th year, we are celebrating the 25 years of WPS agenda. And one of the most important indicators for us would be in terms of implementation, or the challenges rather, is in the context of intersectional identity. So for instance, I would say that one part of the story is the normative framework, the three P's that we are talking about: prevention, participation, prosecution, or whatever is embedded in the context of the pillars of the WPS agenda. The other part of the story is norms diffusion or translation of these norms in the local context. What Professor Vijayalakshmi was talking about, the local. And in the context of the local, for instance, if you talk about participation in Afghanistan, just to give you an example, things are very different post 2021, but before 2021, if you were talking about participation in a context like Afghanistan, which actually adopted a national action plan, you also have to recognize that in Afghanistan, when, for instance, you're talking about, so there is the Afghan Peace and Reintegration Program. As part of the Afghan Peace and Reintegration Program, women were part of the Provincial Peace Council. Now, just to give you an example, so what was actually being talked about then was, if women, for instance, have to travel to the provinces, they should be accompanied by a male member, a mehram. So you understand the kind of dichotomy that exists, So when we are thinking about global normative frameworks around ideas on participation rooted in very liberal participatory frameworks, what then are the challenges for the implementation of these ideas at the local level that also needs to be engaged with? So this is not just so then a very real challenge, a continuing challenge, for instance, in the context of Afghanistan right now, is also the whole context of gender apartheid. So you're talking about segregation of public and private spaces. So I think if you're talking about the importance of intersectional factors and cultural identities in implementing the WPS agenda, I think we need to pay utmost attention to this intersectional framework of analysis in any process of translation of this global normative framework. So I'll leave it at that.
So, Dana, let me just answer one part of it, just to make it simpler. From my old files I looked up, the binaries that used to exist as part of the challenge of feminism and the feminist consciousness, that is what intersectionality really addresses and stops. When you have a public sphere, you have a private sphere. So women in private are treated differently. Then you have a role to play, maybe in a bank, you're treated differently, all that. So, for example, that's a one binary, private, public. Intersectionality and its approach of, say, religion, ethnicity, even caste, I would venture to say, then class, all kinds of things, if you can actually mix together and see how women actually interact with each other when they're advancing their own goals of, let's say, economic progress. Business women together, entrepreneurs together, fisher women. If you look at fisher women, you'll really get a good idea about how, many of these are intersectional ideas that make them work together. So intersectionality itself is not just about showing different typologies and it's not confusing or muddying the waters. It actually allows for a number of variables to be put in, and then you can decide on the final product. The second is WPS agenda is alive. I was happy to see the latest uniform portal, and it has been carrying on. It stopped after 20 some time, but United Nations is still asking for a certain local level, of interventions and interactions, or let's say conversations from there, conversations from local to the global level. How do we institutionalize that part? That is what will show us the intersectionality, and not just our arguments about why we should not include others. Inclusivity is a norm as well as something to be practiced. But here, if you build this whole bridge, or this, if you brainstorm, I don't know how to explain it, but there are organizations in Bangalore and other places that are doing this work, and it's very interesting. But from local women to taking it up, for example, on defining what is safety of women, can itself be a huge project which can benefit from conversations from women in armed forces, okay, women in security keeping forces of the urban land that we live now, and average woman who goes out to shop, or a housewife, or anybody, you understand. So just on the topic of safety, you can see the greatness of what feminist IR methodologies have done to building again, the WPS agenda. So WPS agenda doesn't remain a work in progress alone, but it actively reshapes your understanding of the security calculus as well as the conflicts. And I think the most important thing that WPS agenda's life has been about is that it is preparing you for conflict prevention. And I emphasize that many times. Conflict prevention is what this should go towards. But I leave it up to, our friends here on deciding the importance of intersectional factors.
Yeah, thank you. If with your permission, I'll just take one last question because I see Teresa has raised her hand. She's actually an alumna of our department, Geopolitics and International Relations, MAHE, and now she works with Kubernein, so she pretty much represents both the organization. So, Teresa, over to you. You may ask your question.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanasree, for accommodating this last minute question. But my question is to you, Professor Vijayalakshmi. Excellent point about the desensitization that we're all going through right now. But I wanted to understand what are some of the ways to practically reduce the siloing of feminist IR or inclusive IR within geopolitics?
Great question, Teresa. One is, I hope we can do it also. Me and Dana, maybe we'll rope in Shweta, have collaborative projects in which we can rope in different communities. I think, Dana, that has to be our next project. We can bring forward some serious evidence on how this concept of working together is actually possible. It is doable and we should do it. That's number one. Second is to raise the need for resources and institutionalization at various meetings, because capacities don't get built themselves. They need resources, and without resources it's going to be so. Governments have to become little more conscious when they're doing gender budgeting. I cannot tell you the kind of things we went through to get that thing itself into it, but they will not even understand that, they'll track, for example, what was the target achievement of last year. And this year they have put another target. Has it actually shown up in comparison to last year's target? They will not tell me. So, these are many difficulties that you used to face. So therefore, the way to do this is to collaboratively bring up projects and hammer our institutions, government institutions which fund research, and ask for them to give the research funding and then do that research so that you can talk about how this can go forward. And your methodology is so well set by our scholars. Our scholars have opened such floodgates for us that we are now able to produce knowledge. All we need to do is find the commitment. And then fourth and final one, I would say, is raise the political will. If you think that it's a battle won, I have to tell that it is not. There is still a battle out there. So you have to keep raising this voice at the political level, because political is personal and personal is international and international is political, everything for me. And I can tell you that's how it has to be. Politics does decide everything for us. So politically mainstreaming gender is a project that still continues. So, we need to keep our eye on that. We can talk about how democratic practices by examining committee system in the Indian Parliament or something. But look at the number of women or something. Those studies used to go on earlier, Dana. Now I don't know. I don't think anybody is interested in. There's a sense of, we have arrived, we know what we are doing, everybody is well represented. It's not so. There are many silos and there are still some signs of invisibility. And I think the distress of women needs to be captured so that they can be put together for effective and good policies that help women's problems. That requires political representation and political will. I hope I've answered. I don't know. Sometimes I ramble a bit.
Thank you.
Shweta, do you have any final words or something that you would like to add, or shall we wrap up the webinar? Yeah, okay, cool. But as I think Priyanka has also mentioned in the chat, and Shweta, if it's okay, if anyone has more questions or anything that they would like to clarify, they might reach out to you directly. So but I think it was a great experience for me as well, moderating a session on a subject that is very close to my heart as well, although I don't directly work on this. But this is something that, of course, I teach, and something that is very close to my heart. And I'm glad that we could, as was also mentioned, we could manage to bring those different experiences on board, practitioners, somebody from the diplomatic background, academics, because I think that is the way forward as well in terms of bringing these conversations to more fruition in that sense, and how to center those voices and frameworks in our conversations on international relations, security, peace, diplomacy, and all these different frameworks become very important. Just want to just wrap up this session by thanking everyone for joining us this afternoon. We went a little over time, but I think the richness of the discussion also, I think it was worth delving into these much in a much deeper way. I would like to thank the MISHA and also Kubernein initiative for making this event possible, and just want to take some names here. I think Teresa is already here. We worked on this together with Priyanka, Adya, and some of my PhD scholars as well, who have some interest in these areas. So thank you everyone for helping out with the organization part, and also Professor Vijayalakshmi for inspiring this, because she's been talking about this event, I think, for so long, and we've been like on and off, because it's also busy, as Shweta, as you will understand, in a typical academic institution, with the kind of things that we have to do. But I'm glad that we finally made this possible. So thank you so much, and I hope to see you again, and continue these conversations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dhanasree,
Thank
and thank you so much, Professor Vijayalakshmi.
No, thank you, Shweta. Thank you, Dana. And thank Harita especially for me. She gave me some very useful pointers. I am so, blessed to have such wonderful, willing helpers. I don't know, but nevertheless, this kind of collective thinking can impel us to go to the next level, Shweta. We need to at least encourage a poster competition maybe for the next March, on themes of women and IR or something, and start, and tell them to develop ideas on how they think can solve the problems of the world. There's no dearth of ideas, I'm sure of it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
AI has changed everything now. So